I guess you can see my screen, right?
Yep, it's working. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Pental platform, if someone's still using nowadays, and single sign-on using certificates. So probably you never saw it before, but there is actually a quite good use case for it, and I just will talk about it. Also, I will make this presentation quick because I don't want to go through in all the technical details. But if you have any questions, please raise it. Otherwise, you can also look to one of the repositories where I will show this demonstration. Okay, so what is single sign-on? Basically, single sign-on is just a service where a user just uses the credentials once, or at least once, and he can access across multiple applications. Usually, what for authenticate this user, usually in background there is like a held up a repository or a database. It can exist other things, but usually is what exists in the companies. So there is, in terms of single sign-on, there is many use cases, many techniques. There is the famous ones are SAML or even cache. That is one of the things that Pental can support out of the box. There is host authentication or OpenID. There is also the certificates. That is the one that I'm going to present today. Okay, so just making this very quick, I just make this question, in my personal opinion, what is the most important feature in Pental to have single sign-on, or so why single sign-on is so important in a Pental server, as anyone knows it. That want to, well, it's my personal opinion. So there is many reasons to use single sign-on, but there is one specific that you really need it if you want to have security.
What, the fact that business users can never remember their password?
That's a good one, but not because of that one. But
may I try to guess?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
For embedding.
Exactly. That's my.
That was easy.
Yeah. That's the reason. It's to embed analytics in the web applications. Also, this dashboard is developed by Harris. Just make it ugly. Yeah, that's the main reason, is to pick the dashboards developed in Pental and embed in other web applications. So you will have a seamless user experience with platforms. So about SSO with certificates, usually it's important. It's very used for authentication between two servers. But there is one specific use case that I like it. That is this one, that the citizen cars, especially in Europe or almost across Europe, has a chip. And usually, I don't know in Spain or Belgium, but I know at least Portugal. The Portuguese citizen car has a certificate on it, and with a smart card reader, you can authenticate in the platforms. So basically, if you have a smart card reader connect to your PC, when you authenticate with your citizen car, a certificate gets installed in the Windows cryptography API that is in the Windows operation system. Also, there is something similar in Linux for it, or usually, this countries has its own applications to install the certificates in your computer. So that's probably the most use case. But also you can think of companies to authenticate their users. They can have a smart card, and they can use that same smart card to get inside the building and so on, as well as to get access to the systems. Yeah, so that's probably the most use case to use certificates to authenticate in the web platforms. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about SSL and TLS. So basically, SSL, it's kind of deprecated nowadays. The most used one is TLS, even though SSL still kind of secure. I think the version 3.0, it's still kind of secure. Even the people usually use a lot of the time the term SSL, but in reality, and if you follow the best practice, you configure to be TLS. There is not much difference between the two. Well, there is, but in terms of encryption, there is not. In terms of how the encryption works, there is not much difference. They just work in different layers of the internet. In different layers of the networking framework. Yeah, so usually the TLS works on the transportation layer, where the SSL works on the session, and another layer that I forgot. So SSL usually works on 2 layers. I actually hide the slides to not go too technical on this. So I hide the slides that explain this, but yeah. Okay, so in terms of Java, usually when you are dealing with SSL, you are working with, you will be using trust store or key store. I don't know if anyone really knows why these two things exist in Java, but you can think of a trust store. I usually describe as a wallet. You can think of a wallet where it contains the public certificates of the authorities. Okay, so basically any certificate that is assigned with a specific CA that you have in your wallet, you are going to trust that certificate, basically. So that's the way it works, and that's why usually you set up the trust stores in the client side. And in the server side, for example, when you enable HTTPS in Tomcat, you usually, or you must, set up the key store, which also it's like a kind of wallet. I always describe as a wallet because you can have more than one certificate on it. And this certificate in the key store, it contains your private key, but also your public certificate that will identify you to the client. Okay. The main difference between server authentication and mutual authentication is, and as the name is saying, is, and the image also is clear, the client also do the same authentication in the server side. So usually every time that you go to a website that has HTTPS, what is really happening is just server authentication. Okay, so usually it's just this. So your browser is just it's just trusting the certificate that the server has because it belongs to a CA certificate that is in your trust store. So when you are dealing with self-assigned certificates, you usually have to add that certificate to your trust store because it's self-assigned. So no one, that certificate is not really public. So that's why you have to have your trust store. So yeah. So again, it's what in terms of mutual authentication, it's exactly the same process, but it's between. It happens as well for the client as too. Okay. So, and as you can imagine, this is the way you do single sign-on with certificates. Basically, you have a certificate in the server side and a certificate in the client side. Okay, in terms of Pental configuration to enable this, of course, I try to avoid to go too technical. I'm not sharing source code in the presentation, even though if you want to really look at, you can go to this repository and you can see some of the things I did to make Pental a little bit more secure. It's not, this repository doesn't not contain only certificates, it contains other things about security. You can have a look on that. So it's a Bangra machine, and if you want to, you just can make it up and running quickly, and it deploys. Depending on the security you want, it deploys that for you automatically. So in terms of enabling HTTPS in Pentao, I would say it's quite straightforward. You just have to define a key store and a few properties changed in the Tomcat, and that's it. But to make a mutual authentication, it requires some changes in the server side to accept certificates from the client side. Okay. So basically, you have to develop what is called authentication or a Spring security provider, or it's a Spring security provider in Pentao. So you just can copy paste, for example, in the system folder in Pentao server. You have, for example, these files, GDBC or LDAP. What I did is I did copy the ones for GDBC. Okay, so I just copied these files that has GDBC and renamed them, and I developed a few more classes to capture the certificate from the client side, and I enable these classes inside of these XML configuration files. So if you really want to go deep to analyze this, you can have a look on this repository. Okay. Also, it is necessary to do some configurations in the Tomcat side, and I just talk about one specific property in the Tomcat connector when you are defining the connector for HTTPS. That is this client client authentication. Basically, it's a flag for authenticating the client through the Tomcat. And basically, this property that is here, it can have three possible values. That is true, false, or want. So basically, if it's true, you just can access to the web apps of the Tomcat if you really have a valid certificate for the server. So even if you try to have a certificate generated by yourself, and if it's not assigned by one of the CAs that is inside of this trust store file, you will not have connectivity. You just can access the Tomcat if you really have a certificate that is assigned by one CA that is in this wallet. I call it wallet because you can have more than one CA certificate here inside. then the option false, it's really to disable the client authentication, okay? And the property you want, it's just like it works like as a nice to have client authentication, so it's optional in summary. So if you don't have a certificate, Tomcat will say, okay, that's fine. I will just show you the login page, and you can do the typical username, password, the basic authentication, basically. Otherwise, if you really have the valid certificate, you just get sign in directly, and you just don't see any authentication, and you just access directly to the system. Okay. Yeah, and demo. So it's nice to talk, but it's better to see, right? So I already have, I don't know if anyone has questions. I didn't put a slide for questions. I did on purpose miss a lot of technical things. But if anyone wants, if anyone has questions to raise, feel free. Otherwise, I just will progress with demonstration in the Pentel server. So, I already have it's exactly the same server from the Git repository that I have up and running. And I will open a Firefox browser. Okay, so the reason I'm open a Firefox browser is because every time that I close the Firefox and open again, all the cookies and cache, it gets cleaned. I have this configured in Firefox on purpose because it's easier to demonstrate this feature. So, okay. The first thing, I'm using self-assigned certificates, and if you are familiar, I have to accept the risk. That is quite risky to do this. And I just get in. So I just have HTTPS, and as you can see, there is login page. This is not single sign-on, right? What is happening is I don't have the client certificate in my browser installed. So what I have to do, in this case, I have to simulate. So usually if you are using a smart card reader or something like that, when you are authenticating the smart card reader, the certificate gets installed in the Windows cryptography, and the web browsers also has access to that certificate. In this case, I have to do manually. I'm not using any smart card reader, and I have to install my client certificates. So I go to Preference, Privacy and Security, New Certificates, My Certificates, and I need to import from my Git repository. So the certificates are generated when you do Bangra up, when you provision the VM. The certificates are being generated automatically. Yeah, it's under here. So it's generating two client certificates, one for Samuel Brown, another for John Lee. And when I install, it will ask me for a password, okay? To access that password, when I generate when I provisioned the VM, I did some commands to generate those certificates, and I'm passing here the password, okay? So I have to use this password to install the certificate. Okay. Also, I will put the John Lee one. And again, it's asking me for a password. And in a real life, in a real scenario, this, when you do a smart card reader, you just type your PIN to access the smart card. That is this password, and the certificates get installed automatically. Okay. So you can see I have two certificates. Okay. And now I think I have to close the web browser, but I can refresh because I didn't create any cookie or whatever when I authenticate to do any authentication. So if I refresh, now Tomcat is detecting that the browser is detecting that I have two valid certificates, and I can choose which certificate to use to authenticate in the Pentel server. So in this case, just for John Lee, it's an administrator, and Samuel Brown, it's just a normal user. I will start with the normal user. So if I choose this one and click OK, it should have worked. That's strange. Okay. I don't know why that refresh was necessary. It should have worked straight. Yeah. So I get login to the Pentel server, and I didn't type any more passwords. And I can navigate nice and easy. And one of the interesting things, is that this logout button just become useless, because if I try to log out, and because I have a certificate in the web browser, it gets authenticated directly. So if I try to log out, and because there is already a session created for Samuel before, it just pick up that same certificate. Okay. So if I try to log out, it just logs in again. So basically, when you click log out, it's just become a hard session refresh. Okay. And that's it. So for me to use the John Lee, I can just close the browser or clean the cookies and sessions in the browser. So I will make it nice and easy and just close the Firefox and open again. And I have to type, oops. Okay. This one. So HTTPS slash. And as you can see, it's asking me again for the other certificate, and I just access, and also have to accept the risk, because when I close the browser, it cleans everything. Okay, and this is it in terms of single sign-on with certificates. Just make it quick, and I didn't went through all the technical details. But if you want, if you check out that PM, that repository, you can see all of the configuration files then under here. Basically, they just are being copied and overridden in Pentel server. Okay. And that's it. Does anyone have questions?